Hello. Hey, welcome to the Cult Bar, folks. So yeah, we got I'd say fun in a
voyeuristic kind of way.
voyeuristic way, as we normally do. An interesting one. How about that? So yeah, as you can see at the top, we're going to be talking about shiny, happy people this week. But before we get into that, let's start with what we're drinking. So why don't you give us what you're drinking, Renee?
So to give everyone a look behind the scenes, like Doug and I spend at least a day every week trying to figure out what will fit. And I fell into this weird Reddit thread about Duggar themed drinks for like one of those PowerPoint parties. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's a cool idea. Anyway, they told a story about one of the Duggars, I can't remember which one, doing an interview in Cosmo, and they were talking about how the Duggars don't drink alcohol. And she said sometimes when they're at these political events, there'll be drinks being passed around and they'll think it's punch and they'll take a sip and they'll be like, oops, that's not punch. So I created a cocktail, the Oops, That's Not Punch. It is Puerto Rican rum, cock and bull ginger beer, which I think the name on that brand name is important for this one. Mm-hmm. And Hawaiian punch that I had left over from a different episode of Cult Bar.
Ah, look at you repurposing. How's it taste?
Sonic Ice, which I've recently been turned on to the joys of Sonic Ice versus regular ice.
What is the difference?
Sonic Drive-In, you can get back.
Oh, Sonic. Okay, yeah.
And their ice is like crunchier and slushier, and so it's really good for cocktails.
Interesting. I thought you meant like there was some sort of way to make ice cubes that were called like Sonic ice cubes. Sorry.
Whatever. Like Doctor Who ice cubes. No, it's just. What have you got, Doug?
So since we were talking about basically IBLP and evangelical Christianity, I picked up Sweet Baby Jesus. It's a chocolate peanut butter porter. I have not had a beer on this show, I don't think. So this usually I do cocktails because I always do beer on Brothers and Booze. So, but I was like, I can make all these cocktails. Like, what if I could find a beer? And then I saw that in the shelf, and I've had this many times. It's a great beer.
It sounds awesome.
But chocolate peanut butter porter, so it's gonna be tasty. Could be roasty and a chocolate and a peanut butter, so it's very, very yummy. But Sweet Baby Jesus,
I love that it has an exclamation point.
Yeah. So cheers to you. Oh man, the peanut butter on that's so good too. Oh, yum yum yum. That's a good one. I enjoy that. So before we go, Renee, as always, let's have you give us our little trigger warning because there will be trigger warnings plenty this episode.
Yeah, and just strap in for this one, guys, because there's a lot. I don't know how many people tuning in have watched the documentary. If these trigger warnings make you nervous and you haven't watched the documentary, I wouldn't suggest it. Okay. Ooh. We've got incest. Child sexual abuse, and unfortunately this is going to go to some extremes that we have actually not yet covered on this show, so be prepared for that. Not now, we always talk about spiritual abuse because that's present in every cult, but this is specifically Christian fundamentalist abuse, which might be a little bit harder for more people since I feel like a lot of people have experience with that in the US. High control group, high control parenting, very misogynistic, and just in general, as we get deeper into some of this, Doug and I talked about it, we don't have a really good vocabulary for some of the things we're going to cover because it's actually that much more extreme than your kind of run-of-the-mill sexualization and weirdness you get with fundamentalist Christianity. It's pretty intense. So if we stumble, please forgive us. We're doing our best. This is a really complex one. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, and financial abuse. I almost forgot. So there's some pretty significant financial abuse in there as well.
Yes,
and
very much.
Your general child abuse.
Yeah, a lot.
This one, guys.
Yeah. So, and as I mentioned to you before the show even started, I took more notes for this than even something like Nexium, which Nexium was like, that was a lot. And I took more notes for this than I did for anything else. So
you want to know what's funny, Doug, is I took less notes than usual because enough of it was similar enough to my religious background, but the rest of it was just pretty standout. Like, I'm not going to forget that anytime soon. So I went sparser rather than more deep.
I just know my brain is like at times if I'm taking in that much stuff, sometimes it's a bit of a sieve. So I was trying to remember everything by taking notes. So,
And
but
your
yeah,
brain might want to dump it, to be
yeah,
fair.
yeah. So, and since you had familiarity, I could see why you would take less notes. But anyway, so before we start with all of our fun stuff, how about we do some news?
Okay, so actually, this one's an update, kind
Yeah.
of. There's not any particular news on the trial other than this article does mention that sentencing will be at the end of this month, which I guess we'll be updating on that the next time we get together or on the Instagram. Um, so sorry, go ahead, Doug.
No, in the little byline, it says that she was found guilty of murdering her two kids. So
Oh, did I say
yeah,
verdict?
that's sense.
I meant
Yeah, so
sentencing.
so she was found guilty, but
Yeah.
her husband Chad is trial next year. Anyway, sorry, interrupting.
No, that's okay. Thank you for the correction.
Mhm.
So Adam Cox, the brother who's not dead, and his now it says Vallow Daybell's uncle Rex. I don't know if it's his father or if it's a different uncle. I didn't like clarify that, but they have started to speak out. They have been estranged from the family. The brother Adam we didn't see in the documentary, but we like had some recordings of him, and he was one of the people who was actually concerned about her and did not, I guess, fall for her like manipulation to say that her ex-husband just was trying to smear her because he was angry or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they are setting out with a podcast and apparently a book as well that's coming out later this month to fill in some of the holes in the story and the things that they felt would make more sense if you had their perspective. So we're going to hear from them about the worries that they had about Lori. And the title of the podcast is actually JJ and Taylor. Oh goodness, I forgot it.
I'm trying to find it. It's down there
It's
somewhere.
in here. Tylee and JJ's Silver Linings. So it's very focused on the children. Yep. And I hope now I just found out about this, so I haven't listened to the podcast. So I can't tell you if they really focus on the children, but I hope that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, what we saw this a little bit in the documentary about how it affected her son, but we didn't really see how it affected the rest of her family. Specifically those who did know that there was a problem and weren't in denial about it. I feel like that's got to be an entirely different kind of horror. I mean, being surprised by it is pretty rough, don't get me wrong, but kind of watching it happen and being unable to do anything about it is also pretty bad. So I think it should be pretty interesting. And, you know, we'll see about the book. I don't tend to read books like this, so
me either.
I don't know. If any of you read it, you let us know how it was. But I do listen to podcasts, so I'll probably check this out. And if there's anything really interesting about it, we'll bring it back to Cult News.
Sure. Sounds good to me. All right. So that's news. Nice update there. So thank you for that. And so we are going to have to do a quick rundown of this this documentary because it sprawls. It does. It doesn't just focus on the Duggars. It's a dual focus of the Duggars and the IBLP and Bill Gothard and his teachings.
Now, Doug, were you familiar with the Duggars at all before this? Like, did you watch
not before the show? And I refused to watch the show because I thought anybody that's having that many kids, there's a problem there. Like,
you can get into that, but also, like, I saw maybe a few minutes here and there at other people's houses, and I was like, this isn't for me.
No. So yeah. So basically, the documentary is following the Duggars, which it starts with that because that's where IBLP really kind of came more mainstream. It was kind of an undercurrent of Christian fundamentalism. Like for instance, my wife had a lot of those teachings growing up. So it's been around. It's not new. It's been around for a while. But the Duggars really kind of brought it to the mainstream by being able to be on TV, showcasing their whole concept of having as many kids to, you know, they called it God's blessings, you know, how many blessings God will give you equaling how many kids you could have. And So goes through that whole spiel, I will say, about them, and they come on and they do their show. Their show makes all the kids look like they're these perfect angelic little angels that don't do anything wrong, and everybody's orderly, and there's never a fight, there's never loud noises.
World.
Yeah, it's all perfect. Uh, and of course it isn't. But from there, it kind of branches off a bit and weaves in and out between the IBLP, which is the International Basic Life Principles, which is also tied into ATI, and the acronym is escaping me. Do you remember what the ATI stands for? Something institute at the end, but anyway, basically they're interchangeable. So basically, it's these very, very fundamental evangelical principles, biblical principles to live life by, including things like having as many kids as you possibly can. The purity culture is heavily ingrained in this through IBLP. There's also, there's obedience is a huge thing. Authority is a huge thing. And these things are given through that program. That program also provides a homeschooling curriculum that is supposed to, keep your kids away from public school where they could potentially be brainwashed. Never mind, they're being brainwashed by that.
Right. And be, what was it? The equivalent of a
pre-law and pre-med.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what it was touted as. And then the leader of the IBLP is a guy named Bill Gothard, who is a strange guy, like in ways I can't explain. He's as one of the people in the documentary said, he's an odd looking guy. He kind of has like this Lego head, and he's like ill-fitting suits that like are from Men's Warehouse, and which is interesting because he had a lot of money. But
well, that was part they covered, right? He projected this image of not having a lot of money and not taking a lot of money. So he drove a beat up car and he wore cheap suits, but in reality,
he had his own plane.
A ton of money. Yeah.
Yeah, he had his own plane and everything. So we weave in through that, and it also weaves in through the Duggar family. It then early on dives into the whole Josh Duggar thing where he gets accused and arrested of sexual molestation and child pornography, excuse me.
Yes.
The sexual abuse came earlier, and we'll talk about that because that was swept under the rug. And basically how the Duggars navigated this, and the idea of how they manipulated their own family to keep this show going, or spin-off shows, as we saw later. Mm-hmm. And then it goes into the fall of Bill Gothard. I'm doing a very high level explanation.
Yeah. It's a long series.
Yeah. Well, it's only 4 episodes, but the amount of information you get is just massive. So after the fall of Bill Gothard, then it seems like Jim Bob Duggar, who is the head of the Duggar clan, and Michelle, his wife, are the ones that are going to step in and take over leadership. And at the end, we go through all the problems with all the abuse that is heaped throughout IBLP.
Yeah.
So it's not just the Duggars are the face of this, as they are sort of IBLP, but the big stuff is actually more with IBLP itself. So that's sort of a high level view of what we're going to be talking about today. So,
and one thing I thought was interesting, and it does come up in the doc, is they don't believe in having televisions in the home. But they justified doing this series and making tons of money off of it because it was a opportunity for ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was something that stuck out for me too. Yeah.
I'm always concerned when a religion... Are you? Yeah, well, I was concerned through this entire documentary, but in a more general sense, I'm always concerned when a religion prohibits any kind of media, right? So they do not have televisions. They're not allowed to, this blew me away, by the way. They're not allowed to listen to any music besides like hymns. Even Christian rock and pop are not allowed because, because of syncopation, actually. And I looked it up somewhere else, and the actual thing is like syncopation, like the bass beat. But it is described as African satanic beats. You read into that all that you feel comfortable reading. I know how I took it.
Mhm.
So yeah, but just by default, there's information control, right? Because there is no television, there is no even Christian music, and like that means you're not going to go to a concert and meet people. When you're in these situations, like they talk about going to these events and stuff, they don't have common cultural ground to talk to other people about. You're never going to accidentally catch a news broadcast if you're not listening to the radio or watching television. And I would guess, they didn't cover this in the documentary, I would guess that there is no internet in those houses.
Yeah, I was trying to remember if I saw that, like if any of them had devices. I didn't see them even with cell phones.
And we don't know what they hid from the cameras, right? I mean, we know some of the things they hid from the cameras.
Oh, we
But
know a lot that they had from the cameras.
yeah, like, it could have been like, well, we don't want to have our cell phones out on camera or whatever. But like even Josh's bust for child pornography was at his place of business, not his home.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of leads me to believe that maybe as in the same way that TV and popular or secular or whatever music you want to call it is not allowed, that probably the internet isn't allowed either. And if you're being honest, like giving your kids access to the internet is a lot, like for anybody, like no matter what you believe, there's a risk there. So I
Sure.
think if they think that Nickelodeon is a risk and like DC Talk is a risk, then probably the internet is too.
That stands to reason, yes. So,
Yeah. So yeah,
so go up. What other beliefs do we have to know about here as we're going into this?
this one's tough because
Mm-hmm.
basically take everything you know about fundamental or evangelical Christianity or any version of Christianity, because some people argue about what qualifies as Christianity, any version of it that involves a lot of purity culture and like a patriarchal situation, and you've got that's there. But they tend to take it to this extreme place. Like, for example, this homeschooling program that is supposed to be a pre-law and pre-med degree has the girls doing exercises where they're deciding if the woman in the drawing's skirt is too short or her hair is styled correctly. Because they even have beliefs about how your hair should be styled, which this is funny because I'm going to be like really catty for just a second. Michelle Duggar's hair is a fucking travesty. It's so bad. It's so stuck in like 80s, early 90s, like, and it's the bad version of those hairstyles of that time. But that is what IBLP says that your hair should look like if you want to please your husband. You should have a bad perm and, the crown cut. I like
Mm-hmm.
anybody,
And
any
curly.
girl with thick hair from the like early 90s knows what I'm talking about. And it's awful. It looks terrible. There's only one way to style it, and it's like Michelle Duggar. It's bad. So you have that. Like, it's when we talk about high control, this is like a skirt below your knees is fine, I guess, but shouldn't it really be to your ankles? It's very, very strict. And I just like, because this is not a cult environment, like everybody lives in the same place, it's actually kind of amazing that they have such strict grooming standards for the women, right? Because like, you have religions that, there's certain sects of Judaism where women either wear scarves or wigs so as not to show their natural hair. And like, I think apostolic women are not supposed to cut their hair, but they're not being told how to style it, right? Like the Jewish women who wear a scarf or wear a wig can wear whatever wig they want. They don't have to like go refer to a book and decide how to curl the wig based on what the leadership says. Usually you don't see these kind of grooming standards outside of like a commune cult where everyone's together, because people get haircuts. It's so weird. Like that one is very weird to me. It's just really illustrative of how IBLP manages to really get their hooks in to these people who come into their organization, because I mean, I'm sure you can look at me and tell I don't really take anybody's advice on what my hair should look like. You can, whether that's derogatory in your mind or not is your business. But yeah, so we have these extremely strict standards of appearance for women. One must assume they have strict standards of appearance for men. Probably not nearly as strict. You know, I'm thinking clean cut, no facial hair from what we saw of the people who were active. We did see some former members. It's always funny if you're like, I wonder if this person is in or out. And then you could kind of look and you're like, well, her hair is dyed. Well, she has a nose ring. Well, you can totally immediately tell once you start catching on to what their standards are. And in addition to that, they're part of the quiverful movement. Got to have as many good Christian babies as you can so that eventually we'll all be Christians.
There's also a caveat to that I've learned from my wife is it's also to grow God's army.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that at the end because I added something to your outline, but don't spoilers, Doug. Sorry. It's into the documentary too. But yeah, like the idea is to basically, there needs to be way more Christians than there are anybody else, and they have to be our kind of Christian. And again, the white is implied. I guess I'll bring in this part now. We were going to have a guest this week, but there were scheduling conflicts, and a friend of mine is an amazing journalist named Angel Albring, and she was in one of these organizations that went by Gothard's teachings. She didn't say if it was IBLP specifically, or I mean, I guess anybody can take the book, right? It's
sure.
Weird. But she, I asked, you didn't see any people of color in this documentary. The absence of color is very loud in this documentary.
The only time I saw it was when they were in different countries where they were growing it. That was the only time.
And
the only time.
That doesn't have, in my experience, from a missionary religion, that doesn't have anything to do with whether you're racist or not.
Sure.
But I did ask. I said, because she's a mixed race Indigenous woman. I said, I didn't see any people of color. How, what was that like? And her quote on that was, "As for how people of color are treated, we are flat out told that our suffering is how we earn admission to heaven, and we need more help to become pure." And Doug, you asked if I would be willing to draw any parallels to my religious history. And the LDS Church for a very long time did not allow Black men to hold the priesthood, which every man in the church is supposed to hold. And the reason why is because they were Black, period. That's it. They believed that that Black people are the result of a curse. And that by being righteous and doing all the things you're supposed to do, then eventually you will be made whole. You will be made good enough. And in the Mormon terminology, that is white and delightsome. So they literally taught people, Indigenous and Black people, that if they were good Mormons, they'd get to be white.
Wow.
That feels like a parallel in like, well, yes, of course it's harder for you because because you're Black or you're Native or you're whatever. But isn't that kind of your fault? Like probably God just felt like you needed a little bit more work.
Victim blaming. So good.
Yeah. And I just, it's very uncomfortable. Anything with a lot of missionary work makes me very uncomfortable as well, because I just don't think help should be offered with a caveat. Like a church should be doing work I really believe in, but if it's a church doing it, I won't give them money. That's my line in the sand. And sometimes it breaks my heart to say no, but that's where I stand, because it just shouldn't be an exchange, right? If you believe in it, great. If you don't, you should not have to trade your soul for food or help getting off drugs or whatever it might be. So there's a big, watching those missions really gave me that sense. And we also know that a lot of times when white Christians go on mission trips and build schools and whatever, actually it does a lot more damage, because none of these people are trained architects, construction workers, etc. Right? So if you want to put your money somewhere good, like do Doctors Without Borders, not a church that goes and builds schools that the locals have to then tear down and rebuild. Okay, so the rest of the beliefs. Well, it's extremely patriarchal. It's extremely misogynist. Women are expected to be, joyfully available. to their husbands.
Joyfully available, I think was the term. Yes.
Yeah. That phrase is going to haunt my dreams. Honestly, I'm going to guess, just because of that term, that marital rape doesn't exist in these communities at all. You do what you're told.
No, we know one person that actually said that happened to them on their wedding night in the IBLP, and they were expected to deal with it.
Yeah, well, that's your problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women take on all of the childcare, including, however you want to define women. I used to say females, because as we see what the Duggars do, and I doubt it's uncommon, they have a buddy system. And that means you get assigned a new baby whenever a new baby comes in, no matter how old you are. So we saw videos, clips from the shows of, like a 6 or 7-year-old kid with a toddler in their bed they're responsible for taking care of overnight. And in relation to that, men not only do not help, but they're forbidden from doing certain things. They are forbidden from, for instance, changing diapers, especially if it's a girl baby, because any type of nudity is seen as temptation. This is where we get into this, like, we don't have vocabulary for this, right?
Yeah.
I was really sick. Like, it's just absolutely like, okay, men don't change diapers. Now I'm angry. And then they say, why? And I'm like, I kind of want to throw up. I need to pause this and like collect myself. There's something really, I mean, we know how it ends, right? We know what Josh Duggar went away for. And like, I don't even like saying it out loud. It's so bad. The stuff that he was looking at was not just child pornography, but it was brutally violent infant pornography. And so you see this like explicit sexualization of infants, and you see kind of where it can lead in this documentary. And I think to anybody who is not in one of these chastity, purity obsessed, high control groups, you're like, oh, who sexualizes a baby? That's disgusting. But we don't think about what it does to a person to grow up like that. And I think I mentioned to you, and I wish I had found a source on this, but you can look it up if you're interested. There is something known in some sex psychology as the arousal template, and we kind of don't understand exactly how it happens, but we understand that it happens. And basically the theory is that by the time you hit puberty, the things that you're going to be into are already in there. And when you experience it and you're like, oh, I am into that, it is not like, you can't watch so much porn that all of a sudden you're straight if you were gay, right? Like, that's not a thing that can happen. It's kind of like that, right? So you're not going to, if you're somebody who has no inclination toward BDSM, suddenly wake up one day and be into it. There's something in you that was going to be into it that gets woken up when you are exposed to that specific thing. And BDSM is a big topic. So obviously, like, but whatever. Anyway, I'm watching that with this kind of very rudimentary knowledge of the arousal template. And I'm like, well, no shit. There is so much sexual abuse in these communities because boys are being told from an incredibly young age that babies are sexual objects. And I don't know. I like, there's a lot of things that people find sexual that I don't understand, but if you're into feet, like, find somebody who's into that and be happy. But telling people that, or children, that babies are sexual beings is so horrific to me. And then, like I said, we see where it goes because we hear like these former members of IBLP saying, well, when the story broke that Josh Duggar was touching his sisters inappropriately, one of the women says, I thought that's just what brothers did. Yeah. This is rampant in these communities. This is not an isolated incident where you're like, oh, that's somewhere that this could possibly lead under extreme circumstances. It leads there often enough that when people leave the group, they don't get that change in thinking immediately. They don't leave because I knew it was wrong that my brother sexualized me and molested me, they leave. And then later they're like, oh, seeing the way people are who are not part of the group are reacting to this tells me that my experience was supposed to be abnormal, even though it wasn't.
Right.
And that's horrifying to me. And yeah, I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's really that bad, right? Like when I say we don't
Yeah.
have vocabulary, like part of the reason we don't have vocabulary is because I think there's like nobody wants to talk about this stuff. And I don't think that that's wrong. I think if it wasn't a thing that was happening, if you said, "Oh, I don't want to talk about sexualizing babies," I'd be like, "High five, man! We're on the same team." It's so bad, and yeah, and part of it was that I knew what Josh Duggar had been arrested for going into this, and it made it hard to watch
Yeah.
because I kind of just had that playing in my head the whole time. And I didn't read any detail on it. I think I told you. I read like 2 sentences and I was like, that's enough news for me today.
Yeah, that's good for me.
Yeah. And it really is that bad. And they talk about it in the documentary, and I feel like I almost wanted to zone out because it's really
disturbing.
Yeah, it's just out of this world. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
And unfortunately it does show us something, which is like we kind of tend to think that like that you can't make somebody into a predator like that. Like that if somebody is a predator, there's like some internal thing that was always there. Like there's a flip that got switched, but yeah, I said it wrong, but you know what I mean?
I knew what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah. But unfortunately, I think when we see this and we hear the teachings and we hear the way they sexualize literally infants and young women, and then we see that this problem is actually rampant, it kind of opens your eyes to the fact that this kind of extreme purity does, in fact, sow some pretty horrible ideas about sex in especially in young men, but unfortunately also in the young women, because they grow up believing that it is normal for men to see them as sexual objects no matter what age they are. It is their responsibility to make sure that men are not tempted by them, which we see that in a lot of evangelical and fundamentalist religions as well. I know, like, again, with the Mormon church, there a lot of former Mormons, ex-Mormons call it your porn shoulders, because you're not supposed to wear anything that shows your shoulders in the Mormon church because it could tempt your brother to stumble. Things like that. It's very, it's out there. It's not rare, but the extreme that it goes to in IBLP and with the Duggars is it's just so extreme, right? It's like, well, again, we'll bring in commentary from Angel because I think this is very illustrative. Her pastor, well, I'll quote because it's easier. I don't want to put words.
Yeah.
My pastor was friends with my dad and knew he'd attempted to rape me, the father. The pastor told me it was my responsibility to not tempt men and that my dad was a godly man, but I was a sinner who needed to repent. That was the day I left the church. I was 15. My sister was 15 when she killed our dad for the same reason. And that is unfortunately a very true story. I knew of it as it happened. So this is the kind of thing, like, you just hear it a lot throughout the documentary in different ways.
There was one bit that I remember that is in this vein where you were talking about the hair earlier, and one of the daughters, the Duggar daughters, said, "Oh, well, my dad likes our hair this way, so we keep our hair this way." And I just thought that was fucking creepy. Like,
super creepy.
Your dad likes that hair because it's a thing he likes sexually, maybe not sexually, but you know what I mean? That was something he finds attracted to that.
Yeah. And
you are doing stuff that he's attracted to. So to me, that was just so creepy, but it ties right into what you were just mentioning with Angel.
Right. And we see it, like, one of the things, and we'll get more into this, I think, but one of the things that was heartbreaking for me is even Jill Duggar, her and her husband are not involved anymore. She has a nose ring. She's been photographed drinking alcohol. It's like that. But she kept saying, this is something that should have never come out. And they wouldn't talk about it in any detail. And I feel like that comes from, as much as she's working and changing, right? It is based in this idea that you must have played a part in it. And, as a sexual assault survivor, I feel like it doesn't matter how you were raised, there's always a part of you that feels shame that you have to go and work through.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are in an environment like that, I cannot imagine how much that is amplified.
Yeah. And also the women are subservient. So like the idea of you talking back or speaking up against someone who's a male, because the males are always lifted up and seen as superior no matter what the circumstance. How if that has been pounded into your head since you were little, how do you speak up? Like how can you get the courage to do that when all your life you have been told not to speak up?
And we had that woman who said as much. It was the same woman who said she experienced rape on her wedding night when she was in one of these work camps, basically. I don't there's no other way to put it. We don't have like a perfect vocabulary for this, but they were work camps that they sent kids to. She was molested there by another teenager, and she said, "No one told me how to say no. I didn't know that I could."
And she had no sex education. She had no idea of what anything was. So yeah, it's a whole snowball of like perfect storm kind of stuff,
Here's something. Okay. We're kind of mixing two topics here, I just noticed. And so I feel like we're just going to have to totally wing it for a second. But
yeah,
I think it's time to get into the umbrella protection thing, because it kind of illustrates why some of this is the way it is, and also brings us in, it connects some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Because the next thing I want to talk about, I feel like makes more sense if we know about the umbrella of protection first. So, you want to take that?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I would like to say, like a lot of this stuff, when my wife was watching this with me, and when they started talking about the umbrella, she goes, "That was always in my youth." And she grew up evangelical Christian, not IBLP, but so basically the umbrella of protection works like this. The biggest umbrella underneath it is Christ. The next there's a smaller umbrella underneath that, and underneath is the Father. There's a smaller umbrella underneath that is the mother, and an even smaller umbrella underneath that's the children. So basically, you have to stay under the umbrella, or else Satan will be able to penetrate the protection of the umbrella.
Yeah.
And so basically, it's like the hierarchy is set and you must adhere to it. So if you are a kid, and there's even gradients to that, like if you're a female kid, you must be able to answer to the male sibling. And then that goes up to the mother is the next highest up, and then the father. And then I guess the pastor's in there between God and the father, but they didn't really specify that in the umbrella.
It's, I think they may have touched on this a little bit, but it's kind of one of those things, right? Where well, Gothard is your stand-in for Christ, because he's telling you what Christ wants you to do.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this umbrella is used to enforce authority. That is one of the overarching tenets of IBLP is authority, obedience, authority, and you must obey. And there was one quote where, and I'm trying to remember who said it, and I'm probably going to mess it up, but I think it was a reporter who was talking and did an expose in IBLP and said that they made each father a god and each house an island.
Yes.
So basically in the house, your father was the god of the house.
I think also there's an implication that they don't really go to community church every Sunday, right? It's more of a family thing.
Yeah, they do a lot of homeschooling and home churching, it seems like, too, right?
Yeah, and I feel like that also is information control, because that means that if my dad's Jim Bob Duggar,
God
and
forbid.
your dad is Jim Bob Duggar's former best friend, right? When former best friend starts being like, something's not right, well, you don't want to go to church every Sunday and have me, Jim Bob's kid, talking to this guy's kid, because they're going to be living differently. Yep. They're going to be exploring their doubts. they're going to be talking about these things in the home. And maybe it's just better if that is their problem and not mine, trying to control my family or my husband's, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a similar thing in like evangelical communities where it's basically like if you're a father and let's say you're in like basically you keep your own house in order. It's similar to that, and that's a thing that they harp on quite a bit. So
Um, in the Mormon church, it is set up so that you could do that if you had to, but you are expected to have your ass in the seat on Sunday.
hmm.
So that was another moment where I was like, so this is kind of similar, but actually very much more extreme. But like Jill, I instantly recognized the umbrella of protection. And it comes at a point in the documentary where you've gotten a lot of the more extreme stuff. And so when that hit the screen, I was like, oh boy, I don't like the fact that we're using like that they were using the same like paperwork at my church. And I don't know if that is like across the Mormon church or if that was like some specific Sunday school teacher or something that found this and thought it was great. I can't remember, but I recognized it and it made me very upset.
Well, didn't and the IBLP also said it is non-denominational. They aren't beholden to one sect of Christianity.
Right. They don't think of themselves as a church.
Nope.
Which
it is, but they style themselves as not.
Well, I think it's great that certain paths of Buddhism say that it doesn't matter what your religion is, you can still sit down and meditate. I don't think it's so great when a religion that like tells you how to curl your hair says that.
Yeah, that's not great. That's not great. We'll agree on that.
The intentions are different, you know? Like the intention of those paths of Buddhism are like meditation is really wonderful and you would benefit from it, so you should be able to do it. And their intention is like, well, once I get you in on the umbrella of protection, next thing you know, you're using my homeschool program and we're taking over the world. But the reason I wanted to bring that in now is because we understand now why the kids would do their hair the way dad says to, and why mom would be fine with that, and why nobody would go, why? Isn't that weird? They just go, okay, well, that's what dad said. And then that goes into the next item on our notes, which is we talked about the appearance a lot. It's the way that they talk. And I know when we were putting this together, Greg, co-host of Brothers and Booze, who helps us produce this, he said he always got a vibe off Michelle Duggar that was not her. That there was somebody who could be angry under all that. And I feel like a lot of people get that vibe. And I'm not saying it's anything specific about her, but nobody talks like that. Nobody with 20 children is that calm all the time. And it's a very like sing-songy, quiet, meek and mild. We're all just going to go sit in the room and do our Bible study. Everybody just come and, whatever. And I remember one of the people who knew her in high school said, that's not the Michelle I knew. She was a cheerleader. She could be loud. Mm-hmm. It does make you wonder with the way that the authority is. I mean, you have that clip of the poor little kid, like in the bathroom, chanting instant obedience.
Yeah, and it was like a kid was like 3.
Yeah, and so that's like dad has to go. I mean, they got 20 kids to feed. Dad has to go to work. So mom's at home managing 20 kids. She is not that calm and put together all the time. There's no way. People with one kid are not that calm and put together all the time. Kids are chaos agents. That's what they're supposed to do. And they test you. If you've got 20 of them, you get kids at every stage of development, making all of the mistakes and annoyances that anybody could make in their entire life happening at you all at once. You are going to raise your voice. And
you'd lose your shit at least several times a day. There's no way you wouldn't.
And it's not just that. I mean, like, I don't hold it against any parent who raises their voice and goes, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I need to fix that. I need to,
go and apologize or do all that stuff, right?
But that's not happening in these houses, not under this. And unfortunately, we know that child abuse is perfectly fine in these communities. And so
It's touted.
yeah, it's encouraged. So we know that it's not I raise my voice and I feel bad about it, but it's I raise my voice and then I beat you. And dad's going to come home and he's probably going to beat you too. That's conjecture on my part, but honestly, I don't think
It's not a far leap to make.
I don't think that anybody can prove me wrong. I'm comfortable saying it on the air, right? Like it's just so that really upsets me just from like a point of view of TLC and the parent company Discovery, like they had to know this was bullshit.
Well, they were complicit in all this. There's no way
Yeah,
they
and
were
if
not.
they didn't know it was bullshit, they were still responsible for touting it as acceptable and normal. To expect your wife to behave that way and speak that way and expect your children to be instantly obedient all the time. They allowed it to be an opportunity for ministry. They're fully like they're culpable. And as we find out later, they're also culpable for allowing the parents to sign contracts for the adult children as though they were minors. They're
Mhm.
so this made me so mad in the documentary that they didn't and I know like a documentary has to have a point of view. And there's so much in
Mhm.
here. I can't imagine if they had added anything else, but no one is holding TLC and Discovery responsible. And they really ought to.
I bet you in those contracts they signed, there's a lot of language in there protecting them for that because they
I
have money. They have lots of money, and I'm sure they had great lawyers putting that shit together to make sure they have.
I agree, but I mean like the outside world.
Yeah.
I didn't have a contract with TLC and Discovery, so I'm going to say it. And so could any other popular culture commentator, anybody who writes for Slate or The Atlantic or, whatever. And it just doesn't seem to be a conversation that's happening. And
Mhm.
even the girl that they had on, I'm sorry, the woman that they had on, like it rotted my brain. Like I'm calling
Yeah.
girls. The woman that they had on, who's like a reality TV expert,
Mhm.
it was almost like she wasn't an apologist, but she also wasn't willing to go as far as saying, like, it's not okay to do this without any kind of critique or opposite side view. Like their like protection on that was that they let the niece who wasn't IBLP come over.
Yeah, that was their loophole.
It's so weird.
The before we go further, that particular person you're talking about, that was the reality show person. She
Mhm.
said a few things that I thought were really interesting, and one of the things she said, which I hadn't thought about until she said it, and then I started thinking about it, and she's exactly right, is that reality shows at their base are very conservative,
Yeah.
and I hadn't thought of that, and she's very right
Yeah.
because
And she explained it like how even the Kardashians, like their setup.
their gender stereotypes are all normal. Yeah, the only difference is the Kardashians, all of them make money off that show.
Right.
That's the difference there. But like I thought her evaluation of it being just a very all of that is pretty conservative. Now you have reality shows that are not like that. Like, I we just got done watching one couple weeks ago called The Ultimatum, which was a lesbian ultimatum
I
marrying
yeah,
show, which
I didn't watch that. But
that
so
was
the
great.
funny thing
But
is
anyway,
I'm gonna birdwalk on this for just a second because I think it's really interesting because reality TV started pretty much with the real world and it was
mhm.
anything but conservative.
Yeah,
Then we
that
had
was very
the
progressive.
writer's strike and there was this huge demand for unscripted TV. And that's where we got like this influx of here's like every family with more than 5 kids is on TV. The Kardashians are on TV. There's like 15 dating shows on VH1 every day. Like that influx, it is very conservative. I mean, you think you're watching Brett Michaels take literally, I saw this happen. You're watching Brett Michaels take a shot of vodka out of a woman's vagina, and you're not thinking this is conservative television. But the premise of the show was I'm a white, wealthy man, and I am looking for a mate who is the perfect beauty standard and who will do what I want and live the life that I want to have.
Mhm.
Because he's choosing, it's not mutual, it's not a discussion. Sorry, I have a hair in my eye. So yeah, like when she said that, it kind of cracked a lot open for me.
Yeah.
It was like you, yeah.
It's one of those deals where you just like, you never think of it in that capacity. You just think, oh, it's trash TV. And I'm just as guilty as anybody of watching some of that stuff. But like, if you look at stuff like that, yeah, all that. And it was that lady also mentioned that these shows that made TLC and Discovery become super popular were largely what were considered like freak shows. Like they conjoined twins, and then then we got into like there was a lot of different things that they did that were junk TV.
Was Hoarders TLC?
Yes.
And I thought that
No, wait, maybe not. I can't
AMC,
remember. I
which
I
again,
want I want to say it is because that's the kind of thing they would do. But
but
they
even if it's not TLC, I think TLC started. So this is interesting to me because I remember they talked about this a little bit. I remember watching Discovery as a pretty young kid when it was like you would sit and watch them like you're basically watching as though you're in the surgical gallery,
yeah,
right? And
it was interesting.
it was voyeurism, don't get me wrong,
Sure.
but it was educational at its core. It's stuff that you wouldn't see anywhere else. And then that kind of moved towards like, well, now it's not just about what it looks like to have a C-section. Now it's horror stories about birth that are really scary and dramatic. And then we get into what, like you said, the freak shows, the My 600-Pound Life, My 17 Kids, My whatever.
My addiction to balloons, like one of the guys, like
addiction, which that show really broke my heart. I don't.
that show bummed me out. I'm like, these people have a problem and they're not getting any help, and you're mocking them. And I never got into that shit. But.
And I feel like for the most part, it's not addiction; it's compulsive disorders that need a totally different.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, we could go on about reality TV, but let's get back to one thing we didn't cover about the clothes and everything. Because
we have lots to cover about that if we want to go there.
Let's talk about the safe word, the family safe word, because it's not a real family unless y'all have a sex-based safe word.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things. So basically, obviously their thing was women should dress modestly, have their shoulders covered, nothing exposed, and so basically they taught the kids that if they were out in public and there was a woman who was dressed immodestly, the daughters would say Nike, and all the boys would drop their heads and look down at the ground until the person who was dressed immodestly was passed. That Nike.
Everything about it is absurd, and most of it is offensive. But that's like the whole documentary, right? Like I described the entire documentary. But okay.
I do have another thing to talk about clothes before we move off of clothes, but please go because
I want to talk about the Nike thing for a second because, like, on the one hand, right, I do think that it's better to teach boys and men to just not fucking look if they can't get by without objectifying a woman.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But I feel like part of that teaching is to start with don't fucking objectify women.
Yeah.
Jesus said to pluck your own eye out. It's got nothing to do with how she's dressed. It's got to do with you. So, start there. And then if you have a kid who's got a real big problem or a man who's got a real big problem, then you say, well, if you can't control yourself, don't look. Fine. But that's when there's a problem. That's not where you start,
Yeah.
And like this, it really, and again, who's responsible for making sure that the boys don't objectify that strange
woman? The daughters. Not even the mom or the dad, the daughters.
Well, definitely not the dad because he's not supposed to look either. Although I'm sure he does because who's going to tell him not to look at the ground? It's not going to be his wife.
Nope. He could look at everything and objectify the hell out of it.
And he does. I'm sorry. I'm not. I don't regret saying it. I'm not sorry.
No. But regarding the clothes too, because this, like I said, you got to cover shoulder. One of the things that I thought was super interesting was when I think it was Joel Duggar was talking about how they have to wear pantaloons under their dress. Use the term pantaloons. Like the last time I heard that, I was watching like a pirate movie or something.
I say pantaloons every day, but it's because I have a fluffy cat. So he's got little pantaloons.
But yeah, so pantaloons are like it's like the puff. It's like if the puffy shirt from Seinfeld was on your legs, and then you had to wear a dress over top.
Yeah, because like, okay, so bloomers are still a thing. If, for example, you do cheerleading or, like the more advanced color guard girls wear bloomers because they wear shorter
Mm.
skirts and whatever. And that is just nice.
Well, that
Like
makes
putting
sense.
on a show and you want people to look at what you're doing,
But you don't
not
want to put on a real show.
right. Because if you've got a whole uniform that matches and your underwear are a different color, people are gonna be like, oh, fine, wear bloomers. But bloomers are just full coverage undies in the same color as your skirt.
Hmm.
That's it. And it's literally because you're doing something where your ass might show. You're not wearing any like the strongest wind that has ever hit America. Hurricane force wind cannot blow up a skirt that hits the floor. They're not circle skirts. They can't even, like come
Yeah,
up like this. What the hell? What's the point of that?
because
And how do they
it,
pee?
it,
Like,
rem- it's just the idea of like that super purity and purity culture shit, just the modesty. Everything has to be modest, especially if you're female. If you're male, somewhat, but not as much. But the idea that like you can't show your legs, like
in a dress that doesn't show your legs.
yeah, and the dresses are long. They are not fucking like short skirts. They're not even knee length. They're long fucking skirts, and you're wearing fucking pantaloons underneath it, and some of them wearing these goofy hats. That I didn't understand, but like again, I'm not here to criticize fashion choices. I'm here to criticize the
The
purity
reason for the
mindset behind
fashion
it.
choices, though, I think is important because I know people who, progressive as the day is long, and it's summer, so it's pretty long. They choose to wear clothes that cover everything. So that's how they're comfortable. That's what they like. That's the fashion they're into. And there's not a
Mhm.
lot of them where I live because I live in the desert. And in the summer, you do what you got to do to get by. But there's people who're just like, I'd rather wear an ankle length skirt. I'd rather wear, a blouse that goes to my wrists,
Mhm.
and that's fine. But those people are allowed to change their minds. They're allowed to say, you know what? Actually, it's 110 degrees. I'm going to wear some jean shorts today and just be comfortable.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that parallels with Mormonism, though.
Yeah, true.
Because the children don't have to wear anything under their clothes, but they're expected to wear clothes that would accommodate the special underwear. So
Oh,
you
okay.
don't get it until you're an adult and you go through this whole super secret ceremony in the temple, which is not the same thing as a church. It's all very normal. It's not a cult, right?
Not
Uh,
all.
only people who've left think it's a cult. Anyway,
Wonder why that is.
but you get these underwear, and for women, I think probably it's about here. It might be a tiny bit longer, but it's a cap sleeve, and the shorts go down to your knees, and they're all white, and you are literally supposed to wear them between your underwear and your body. They have to be on your body, not like you don't put it over your bra and panties. You put it under your bra and panties, and it is so ingrained that you absolutely wear them all the time. I mean, there's like mythologies around it, like you can survive a house fire if you're wearing your garments. Um,
No, you can't.
no, you can't. There's even stories where they're like, well, sure, he died, but the part of his body that was covering the garments wasn't burned. And it's
No,
like,
so,
well,
but the
nothing.
underwear magically untouched.
What? He's still burned to death. Anyway, so you got to wear that. And to the point that women were getting, because you have to buy them from the church, women were getting yeast infections and all sorts of horrible things because they're made cheaply.
Yeah.
Yeah, you still got to wear it. Doesn't matter what your gynecologist says, and your gynecologist is probably a Mormon too, because that's how they are. And one of the things that's interesting in the ex-Mormon communities is you'll hear people say, like, when their families started to get a hint that they were drifting, they'd get garment checks at their parents' house. Their parents would be like pinching to see if it was there or looking. Well, t-shirt sleeve is a little short. Are you wearing your garments? So that did strike a chord with me too, because it's similar, but almost in the Duggars case, almost less restrictive. That's the one place where they're like less extreme than the Mormons.
Interesting.
And the men have to wear garments too, but they're different.
Yeah. I imagine it would be.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, I think we can't, part of this whole thing, like I said, everything really ties together is the idea that you have to wear these garments, you have to follow orders, you have to follow authority. And that leads to enforcement and punishment and discipline.
One thing I want to get to that's not explicit in this person we're going to talk about is you never stop spanking children, including your adult wife.
No, we saw that in the doc.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Like years ago, I remember reading about the Christian discipline movement, and it's basically BDSM for Christians,
Mhm.
but with a lot less choice, right? Because like it's always the woman is getting spanked or sent to stand in the corner, and even in the documentary, they say, you know, you negotiate whether sex is involved or not. But let's be honest about it. What a negotiation is. The husband says
Yeah, the
spanking
husband
his
is the
wife
one.
and making her stand in the corner turns him on. Then sex is how it ends. But if he just does it because he wants to spank his wife because he's an asshole, then maybe you don't have sex because it doesn't turn him on. He just likes it. So
Well, and you still have to be joyfully available.
right, that's the thing. The idea of sending a grown ass adult who you're supposedly, I mean, I say you're supposedly partners with, but I don't think they believe that in any meaningful
No,
sense.
this is not a partnership. This is
But
you're
to
beneath me.
stand in the, you don't respect me if you're making me stand in the corner because I didn't, because I burnt a pork chop.
Yeah.
And and that's not to say that for people who are into that as explicitly as a kink, that it happens in a consensual and well negotiated way. Like, do it all
Mhm.
you want. Like, if you're doing it because it makes your partner happy, by all means, do that in the confines of your sexual practices. But the idea that simply by marrying somebody who is part of one of these belief systems, you're subjecting yourself to being spanked, stood in a corner, almost certainly having your ass chewed like you're 5 years old. Like, I feel like on Clue, the flames. You know, it's just really. Hmm.
Mm, yeah. Are you okay?
No, but I'll be fine. I'm a little bit too deep in this drink for where we're at in the show. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I gotta get
All
through
right.
it.
So the person you're talking about is the Pearls, and I believe it's Michael and
Like,
Debbie Pearl. And they wrote a book called "How to Raise Up a Child."
to train
Or
up a child.
to train up a child. You're correct. Sorry, I wrote it as "raise up" in the notes. My bad.
Oh, I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
But
So
I
go
was
ahead.
familiar with this from the baby. This is so embarrassing, but I'll admit it. I was on the baby boards when I was pregnant, where all the moms come to like compare stuff about their due date, but then also bicker
And that leads to enforcement and punishment and discipline.
One thing I want to get to that's not explicit in this person we're going to talk about is you never stop spanking children, including your adult wife.
No, we saw that in the doc.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Like years ago, I remember reading about the Christian discipline movement, and it's basically BDSM for Christians, but with a lot less choice, right? Because like it's always the woman is getting spanked or sent to stand in the corner, and even in the documentary, they say, you know, you negotiate whether sex is involved or not. But let's be honest about what a negotiation is. The husband says,
Yeah.
spanking his wife and making her stand in the corner turns him on, then sex is how it ends. But if he just does it because he wants to spank his wife because he's an asshole, then maybe you don't have sex because it doesn't turn him on. He just likes it. So,
well, and you still have to be joyfully available.
Right. That's the idea of sending a grown ass adult who you're supposedly, I mean, I say you're supposedly partners with, but I don't think they believe that in any meaningful
No,
sense.
this is not a partnership. This is
but to stand in the, you don't respect me if you're making me stand in the corner because I burnt a pork chop.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that for people who are into that as explicitly as a kink, that it happens in a consensual and well negotiated way. Like, do it all you want. Like, if you're doing it because it makes your partner happy, by all means, do that in the confines of your sexual practices. But the idea that simply by marrying somebody who is part of one of these belief systems, you're subjecting yourself to being spanked, stood in a corner, almost certainly having your ass chewed like you're 5 years old. Like, I feel like on Clue, the flames. You know, it's just really.
Yeah. Are you okay?
No, but I'll be fine. I'm a little bit too deep in this drink for where we're at in the show. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, screw it.
So the person you're talking about is the Pearls, and I believe it's Michael and Debbie Pearl. And they wrote a book called How to Raise Up a Child.
To train up a child.
To train up a child. You're correct. Sorry. I wrote it as raise up in the notes. My bad.
Oh, I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
But
so
I was familiar with this from the baby. This is so embarrassing, but I'll admit it. I was on the baby boards when I was pregnant, where all the moms come to like compare stuff about their due date, but then also bicker and debate things angrily. So this came up in those. So I was familiar with this when I first heard about it years ago when it broke that the Duggars use this stuff.
Yeah, I had heard, like, kind of loosely heard about it when I was younger, but it, you know, it wasn't really prevalent where I was from. So not really. I mean, I got spanked and all that shit with a belt and everything when I was a kid, but not like what they talk about. So this is basically how to beat your kid without getting in trouble with the police.
Yeah.
No. So Michael Pearl and his wife.
Do you mind if I give some context? Because what broke
Go ahead.
with the Duggars is not that they use the Pearls' teachings. Even though it comes out in the documentary that this is recommended. What broke with the Duggars was blanket training. And this is horrifying. Like, to me, this is horrifying, but it's not as horrifying as what we're about to get into. So, like, if what I think next upsets you, either gird yourself or excuse yourself for the next few minutes, right? Like this, I think it's a good way to do it. So do something called blanket training. Because here's the thing, right? If you are just having as many kids as you can possibly have and never ever doing anything to space them out or stop if you feel like you're overwhelmed or anything. So you parentify your kids like we talked about earlier. The kids are taking care of babies and all of that. And the other thing you do is you have to have the most obedient infant in existence. And here's the thing about infants. They are not. Infants only know need. All of the teachings we're about to talk about, like, reject the idea that infants communicate needs.
They're willful. They're willful from birth. That was the terms they were using.
I do remember once on those baby boards, someone saying that if your baby wakes up in the night crying, while you're sleep training that they're manipulating you to pick them up. And I was like, ooh, oh boy, you shouldn't have kids. But this whole thing feels like that, right?
The whole thing, yes.
So blanket training is you get a blanket and you put it on the floor and your baby's on the blanket like you do, right? That part's normal. And baby has tummy time, which is healthy. That's all good. But then baby gets to crawling age and you're a busy mom of 20. So what are you going to do? You're going to make sure the baby stays on the blanket because God forbid you buy a fucking playpen, right? Because the point is not to contain the baby. The point is to control the baby. And the side effect is that the baby doesn't bother you anymore after a while. So what you do is you put the baby in the middle of the blanket and you put something the baby really likes. So for me, it'd be my iPhone. And you put it outside the blanket so that if I get to the edge of the blanket and I reach, I cannot actually touch my iPhone, right? So I'm going to crawl off the blanket to get my iPhone or whatever it is that, your baby really likes, their favorite stuffy, their rattle, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And every time the baby goes off the blanket, you swat it with a wooden spoon. Every time. Until the baby learns that it's dangerous to leave the blanket. The baby doesn't learn to respect you. The baby doesn't learn that it's dangerous to leave the blanket because there's risks. The baby doesn't learn anything but when I do a normal baby thing that's part of my development, I'm going to get hit. So I better just stay right here. This is what concerns me about it. On top of the fact that you should not be beating babies, like let's have that as our baseline. But the second concern is that crawling is incredibly important to brain development, not just gross motor skills, but brain development. And they are being punished for doing this very natural thing that they are supposed to be doing at that age.
Yeah.
You've got to let your baby crawl. They need to. But you're deciding, I'd rather they didn't. So I'm going to beat them with a wooden spoon instead.
Yeah, there was one person in there who was talking about how their 14-month-old wasn't listening to them and was embarrassing their mother. So they would beat their kid's ass and I'm like, it's a 14-month-old kid. It's like a year and 2 months. And they're like, they don't know shit. Like they're trying to explore the world. What's your problem? So yeah, it's like I said, this is where it starts. It starts with the blanket training.
And I would say I think your average crawling age is between 6 to 9 months or 4 to 9 months, like on your extremes of super early to super late. And your average is somewhere like in 6 to 7. A 6-month-old baby does not have wants.
No, everything is a need.
Possible. Like it's just not possible. They don't have a concept of desire. They only have needs. And so when you are disciplining a 6-month-old, you're teaching them that their needs are not important and will not be met. That is it. That's all there is to it. This is not an argument for any specific kind of parenting. I feel like you can meet a baby's needs in a lot of different ways.
Yep.
But not by beating them, which you would think goes without saying. But unfortunately, as we learned, it doesn't. This is happening.
Yeah. It's a mess.
Good girls.
Yeah. So anyway, this getting farther along past blanket training, but like I said, that's where you start. Start with the blanket training, and
I think we start before that actually.
Probably, but
that's babies being behaved in church. Mm-hmm. When a baby cries in church, I think that was the example, right? It's embarrassing the mother because the mother isn't doing a good enough job.
Yep.
So when a baby cries in church, you feed the baby, you rock the baby, you give the baby a toy to play with, maybe give a pacifier, maybe you leave the sanctuary and feed the baby.
Maybe go for a little walk or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but according to Dr. Pearl, who I don't know, like they're not calling him Dr. Pearl in this article I found, so maybe
I wouldn't call him a doctor no matter if he had a doctorate or not. Fuck that guy. But
yeah. I mean, he's probably one of those people who just faked it. And that happens a lot. Like the guy who wrote Women Are from Mars and Men Are from Venus, he's not really a PhD. Anyway, you don't do any of that. You hit your baby with a glue stick. Adult learns not to cry in church.
Mm-hmm. So this Michael Pearl, like I said, earlier I said this is what even somebody in the documentary even said this is just basically how to beat your kids without getting the police involved. So he even equated, one of the quotes in the documentary was, he said that training a child and training an animal are the same.
Yeah.
So basically, it's like you
I wouldn't
use.
train an animal this way either, for the record.
No, neither would I. But basically, it's like you use a switch, a spoon, whatever. Somebody said a PVC pipe, and I was like, PVC pipe? Like, Jesus Christ! But like, you basically just beating your kid into submission, and you also, there's certain kind of submissions, like whether or not you cry, or if you're allowed to cry, or you're not crying hard enough, and it's all determined upon the person doing the beating, and it's usually the father. So the father just determines, like we saw that one really fucking creepy pastor bring some random kid up and do the spanking thing.
I thought that was Gothard.
No, it was not Gothard. It was a different guy. But he said, so here's how you spank a kid without raising your voice. And, he's doing a fake, like he's tapping the kid on the butt and like, you're going to go up to your fine, you're going to blah, blah, blah. And then like, okay, it was wrong, blah, blah, give me a hug. And this is an example, folks. This is just an example. This is him doing a thing. This is how you do it. Not even his kid. And the kid gets up and he said, now give dad a hug. He's pretending to be dad. And he's like, I don't think that hug was strong enough. Now I'm going to spank you more. I'm like, what? And the fucking audience was laughing. I'm like, this is fucking weird. But that's the premise, is you are using physical punishment as a means to get your kids, quote unquote, in line, to not raise their voice, to not have an opinion, to make sure they are quiet and obedient. Just like you see the Duggar family, all their kids are quiet, smiley faces. On camera, they're all that. And
let me tell you that
right about it.
You wouldn't have to have any thing in your beliefs about spanking into adulthood if it worked. I believe with all my heart and soul that those kids would. I love the ad that we're doing for free for Ari.
Yeah, all right, Ari. Hey, and the thing is, it stays on when you scroll, which sucks.
Rude. Anyway,
thanks, web programmer.
Which is weird because I don't even have that on mine.
Yeah. Anyway,
But yeah, so if it worked, you wouldn't have to keep spanking them into adulthood because it would just work, right? So I believe firmly that when those cameras were off, those kids did act up and did get beaten. And probably also when the cameras were on, if they spoke out of turn or, any minor little thing, I got punished as soon as the camera crew went home for the night.
Well, there was a thing that they even discussed where with the Duggars said, like, the mom would be like, say very cheerily, do you need encouragement? And they would take them into a room and beat their ass in a room off camera. And they would say it very cheerily, like it was just a normal thing. Do you need some encouragement?
So your crew, your producer, they knew about that.
Oh, absolutely, they did.
They wanted their paycheck, so they didn't say, we can't do this. Like, I'm sorry, but I feel like it's within your power as a crew member to say, I'm not working on the show anymore. As a producer to say, we cannot do this. And yet they continue to do it. And when they couldn't do it anymore because everyone was like, oh no, Josh Duggar's a fucking pedophile, they're like, what if we looked at the oldest daughters instead?
Yeah, why don't we go over here and make money off of that? So yeah, this article I threw up here is basically where somebody, I'm not sure exactly who, somebody's kid died as a result of these teachings of Michael Pearl.
Multiple kids died if you get into this article, but yeah, it's so
yeah.
It starts out with some really weird shit. Okay. A story of a woman named Melissa Fletcher, whose mother would dress up and pretend to be a child protective services agent, officer, I don't know what they're called, social worker, I don't know, and would drill her to, where did,
she was drilling her kids. Like, where did this come from?
To drill her children to, Melissa Fletcher is the child, actually. So yeah, but why do you have a black eye? Oh, I ran into a cabinet. Where did that bruise come from? Oh, I fell. Like, aren't kids getting hurt all the time? But she's actually coaching her children CPS might come. So if they do, this is the lies you tell to make sure that you don't get taken away. This is nuts to me. That is like the ultimate proof that somewhere in this line of giving this information away knows that they're wrong, right? If you think you're right, then you think that you can probably argue it in court if you need to. That's my opinion. Maybe it's not based in reality. So we have, yeah, and again, 2 to 3 hour beating sessions that her husband carried out on his children to break their will.
Yeah, to break the will of the child is the whole premise of all this.
Yeah, the spare the rod, spoil the child is the whole concept. And we had multiple infant deaths. Basically, the Pearls believe that you are a good, godly parent, taking care of your children's best interests if you beat the shit out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't beat the shit out of them,
then you're doing them a disservice.
Yeah, you're wrong. You're like, they're going to go to hell because of you. So we have kids who died after being beaten for fucking up at homeschool.
Yep.
A learning experience where you get something wrong, you get beaten to death. They had, yeah.
It's just
okay. It's really bad, you guys. So homicide by abuse. Hannah, who her brother had been adopted from Ethiopia, died from hyperthermia and malnutrition and was found face down in her backyard. That's the real thing. She was whipped, forced by her parents to sleep in the barn, shower outside with a hose. Her parents used a 15-inch plastic tube that is recommended by Michael Pearl to discipline children.
And he said that that's a good instrument to use because it doesn't harm the muscle or bone.
Which is not true. It just doesn't necessarily leave marks. So one thing we know about things that don't leave marks is that they can still damage your organs. They can still damage your muscles. They can still really fuck you up.
And the point of not leaving marks is to damage internally. It's not to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Of course, the parents are ultimately responsible for their actions, but I think that's important to point out is that they're being given really bad info. Like they're being told that by doing this, they're not harming their children. And to not talk about the emotional harm, like they're physically harming their children. This can, as we see, literally result in death. Same year, 7-year-old in Paradise, California, which strangely is not a town that exists anymore. It got wiped off the planet 2 years ago, I think, by fires. Anyway, beaten to death with rubber tubing. Died from severe tissue damage, and her sister had to be hospitalized. 4-year-old son she was a mother of a 4-year-old convicted first-degree murder, and the teachings of Pearl came up in the trial. He was suffocated after being tightly wrapped in a blanket, and his 5 other siblings testified they had been beaten daily with the same plastic tubing. Quote from Michael Pearl, "It is a good spanking instrument. It is too light to cause damage to the muscle or bone," as Doug said. Obviously, that's not true. You don't die from tissue damage if it's not harming your tissue. Pearl told the newspaper that it is absurd to link his book to cases of abuse. Quote, "If you found a 12-step book in an alcoholic's house, you wouldn't blame the book. Except for the difference is that a 12-step book tells you not to drink and his book tells you to abuse your kids. Like they're not, it's not
a difference.
Whatever your opinions on 12-step are, they are not encouraging you to drink. Okay. Like, yeah. And this is not an IBLP thing. This is rampant in fundamentalist Christian homes. They,
but IPLB endorsed it.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I'm saying
it's not specific to IBLP.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, it's like,
it's just gross and fucking bad and child abuse.
The woman that they open the article with says she is now in therapy that is usually reserved for soldiers of war because of the ritualized trauma.
I believe that.
Her father would put her face in the pillow so no one would hear her scream. Years later, when her father became a pastor, he brought the rod and pillow in to demonstrate to his parishioners.
Awesome. What a shithead.
So, and I couldn't find the article I was actually looking at, but as I understand it, one of the initial controversies with to train up a child is that a child in their care, this could be wrong, it could have been a different child, but I couldn't find the source, so I apologize, died of malnutrition. Because it's also about these super strict feeding schedules that, again, don't have anything to do with like the reality of an infant. They have to do with control. So I am in complete control of my infant if they don't even cry to be fed, right? So I'm going to work to have some kind of strict feeding schedule. Well, okay, that's not how babies work. Babies go through growth spurts. Babies get hungry at random times. They drink less or more milk at certain times. Like, you kind of are obligated to feed a baby when it's hungry.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like it goes from everything from literal malnutrition to being beat to death. And IBLP recommends this as a way to raise your children. They recommend it as like the answer. It's going to save your child's soul.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you have the umbrella of protection. So who do you tell?
You can't tell anyone. Yeah.
And if you talk to people who grew up in extremely abusive homes, they have as much trauma from the parent who didn't beat them as they do from the parent who did, because the parent who didn't beat them still let it happen. And so even if mom doesn't join in, which I think probably, like who do you think's holding the baby in church?
Yeah.
So moms do it. But even if she didn't, there's still really complex and horrific trauma involved with this. And at the same time, I think this also goes into this kind of weird grooming, because it teaches children that their needs are not important, that they cannot trust their body, that they cannot trust their feelings of this is a wrong way for someone older than me to interact with me, that it is okay for people who love them to hurt them physically and emotionally. Like, it just all goes back into, I know we're used to hearing this word lately, groomer and grooming, as like you happen to be gay and you are within 10,000 feet of a child, which is bullshit. But in reality, this is what grooming looks like. Grooming looks like telling kids that babies are sexual. Grooming looks like telling kids that their needs do not exist and that discipline is the most important thing. The instant obedience is the most important thing. You hear someone say, I thought that's just what brothers did. The story you're not hearing is how many fathers do it.
Yeah.
Because they have ultimate authority. You as a child, and I'm not saying at all that the wives in these families would be okay with their husband doing this. I think probably some of them would, unfortunately. I think a lot of them would be like, that's my line in the sand. You can't molest our kids. But that mother is never going to hear about it because you were raised. Why would you go down a step? Dad's in charge. The only place I can go is to Jesus. Well, dad says that he's talking to Jesus. There's no one to talk to. Jesus isn't here. He's not, so who do you tell? You don't tell anybody. And you're homeschooled. So
you
have a teacher. And God only knows what kind of medical care these kids get.
Oh, probably not great, I would imagine.
Yeah, so they're not having doctors going, why the heck is it that your kid is peeing blood?
Yeah.
From getting beaten with a plastic tube. So yeah, this is great.
Agreed. I couldn't agree more. So yeah. So we have not even gotten into
half an hour to get through like the worst part of this shit.
Yeah. So we haven't gotten to the accusations on both Gothard and Duggars. We'll start with Gothard because he's the head. He's the figurehead, right? So he's a figurehead of IBLP. Everything falls below him. So Gothard is just, like I said, he's this dude who, strangely enough, was never married and never had kids, but is telling people how to have a million kids and don't ever even kiss before you get married. Just freaking wingnut is telling people what to do in that realm, and he's never even been either a father or a husband. So, so Gothard he's a figurehead. He's bigger than life. Like he is a rock star according to these people who follow him. Like he's adored.
Oh, they're not
So
allowed to have literal rock stars, so they have no idea,
no,
right?
they don't know. To them, this is a rock star. This guy runs everything. This is the teacher. So, like, if you were asked by him to go to headquarters, and multiple girls were always girls, always young girls, were said, "Do you want to go work at headquarters?" And they were like, "Absolutely," because holy shit, it doesn't get any. I can't get any higher than this as a woman. So they would
And
go.
most men are not getting that high. So it's like this, like, because they don't know why they're going. They don't
No, they don't.
understand that the reason they're getting to do something even bigger than most of the boys and men they know is nefarious and not
Yeah.
good.
So, as it turns out, as I'm sure most of you can figure this out at a time, he was basically abusing these girls, and they were all underage girls. The one girl said that she was asked to come to work at the headquarters when she was 14 and got there was 71, which age gaps age gaps greater than like 25 years really fucking creep me out. Like doesn't matter gender, it just creeps me out. I just
I feel like there's like a point at which it stops mattering, like ethically, right? Like if you're 40 and you want to date a 65-year-old, like the power balance is probably in your favor.
yeah, that's probably fine.
But like, mm,
I don't know. And I will tell you that's
I generally
not,
agree with you.
it still creeps me out if it's an older guy and a younger woman. Even if it's like a person like Al Pacino who got his girlfriend pregnant and Pacino's like 70 fucking 8 years old. That's gross. Sorry, that's gross to me. They're consenting adults. I get it. In my creepo meter, that is way up there.
Yeah.
So, um, so this is like this 71-year-old guy is basically kind of grooming this 14-year-old girl, and this girl's had. This is where we're also going to start stumbling into the folks, a bunch of people who are ex-IBLP who were abused, sexually assaulted, raped, all of it. It's all of them are just recounting these horror stories. And this girl was like one of the people who brought a suit against Goddard as that he molested her. And she gave her full name and everything on the document. And good for her because that takes a lot of nuts.
It
And
does.
it takes a lot of courage to be able to do that, knowing the blowback you will get. So it I'm stumbling here because just the breadth of Gothard's missteps, even including his brother. His brother
Yeah,
is
so
a
his
whole
brother
different.
got busted first, and they just kind of made that go away. And then he's
Yeah, but
doing the same shit. Like,
they made his brother go to this other facility, and then the girls who disobeyed Gothard would get sent to that
oh God, I forgot
facility
about that. You're right.
because that was their punishment for disobeying Gothard was to go to the facility where his brother Bill was because
You can
Bill
only
was
imagine what that
worse.
means. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's this whole
Mm.
thing. Yeah. Anyway, tell me what you think about your opinion here on all the Gothard stuff and all the people. Like there's a lot of people involved here. I wrote a whole bunch of names down. I can't remember them all because there were so freaking many. Like just people who had bad experiences with him or just bad experiences with IBLP. I don't know.
I don't even know.
Your turn because I'm flustered for a moment.
I don't know if I have anything to say that is insightful, right? Like this is your unfortunately run of the mill church leader sexual abuse. But because they have these centers all over the country and now in several countries, it's on a scale that's hard to imagine, right? Like when you hear about it happening in the Catholic Church, it's a large scale, but it's multiple people. It's not one guy. Um, yeah, and it's like so you stand at the pulpit and you tell girls and women that they should not even have a kiss before their first date, and then you tell them to come work for you and you're doing more than kissing, and how, like, to me, they don't get into what he said or how he made it okay, which I think is fine. It is not up to those victims to explain it. But I imagine that there was some kind of weird manipulative shit going on there.
Mhm.
I cannot imagine how confusing it was on top of violating. I
Yeah.
I
How
don't
do you?
know, man. I'm with you. It's really hard to talk about because, well, okay, here's a perspective.
Okay.
How fucking weird is it that he and his brother are doing the same thing? And that gives us, I guess, an idea of where they got their ideas about how to raise a family, right? Like where that started. It started above them.
Hmm.
Because this, like that,
But above him was his father, who was the head of the Gideons of all things. Do you remember that?
the Bible Gideons.
Yeah, like
I did not remember that.
Bill Gothard's father was the head of the Gideons, like the people that deliver the Bible to hotels. So yeah, it
Here's
how
the
the
thing, though. It's all going to come back to the same thing for me over and over and over. You have these religious sects that are purity obsessed.
Mhm.
They are obsessed with evil, the appearance of all of that. These people, we see it every day. They're the sickest people out there, whether or not they're doing anything. Because I walk down the street, and again, I live in the desert. Okay, people are wearing next to nothing every day because that is how you survive out here, right?
Right.
Like I changed twice before sitting down because even though I'm in my house, I was going to wear a vintage shirt, and the fabric was too thick because it's vintage. It was built to last, and I
Yeah.
was cannot wear it even in my own home. It's too hot.
Right.
I never ever look at any of these men or women and immediately start thinking about sex. I never do that. Even if I see somebody, I'm like, wow, that's an attractive person. I don't jump to lustful, graphic thoughts. I don't
Mhm.
ever in my life think, well, that girl's asking to be raped. It doesn't happen, right?
Right.
These people go through the world and they see a girl out here in Joshua Tree in a bikini top and a pair of shorts because it's 110 degrees, and they think that she is the devil. They think that she is a harlot, a Jezebel, and then continue that line of thought to justify it. They think about depraved sex more than 90% of people on the planet. And it's really upsetting because there's no check for it because they believe that these thoughts are what protects them from evil. It's like, no, your thoughts are the evil thing. No normal person looks at a baby and thinks, well, if I let a man look at that baby, he's going to want to fuck that baby. Nobody thinks that way.
Not normal people, anyhow.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, unfortunately, people do think that way. So you're right. But it's like, it is so twisted and diseased.
It's
But in
projection.
their minds, it is the holiest. It is the most godly. It is so pure. And it's like, no, there's absolutely nothing pure about thinking sexual thoughts about babies.
No. I don't have any additions to that.
Or 13-year-old girls for that matter, unless you're a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah. So
Or a 13-year-old who is attracted, I should say. Unless but yeah.
yeah, there's a difference there. But well, part of these, I think part of it is the idea of like you're being forbidden these thoughts, which if you're of a certain age, forbidding people those thoughts makes you automatically go, well, why are they forbidding these? Unfortunately, there's a curiosity, but not for babies. There's a big difference. Like,
Right.
but the idea of having lustful thoughts is not uncommon at most any age, other than like babies. But I'm saying, like, if you're a teenager, that's normal.
Right.
Like, and they're trying to deny that, knock that off. That is not part of your drive. That is your
But
drive is,
doing it they're doing it, it's like,
but they are doing it, and just they're saying we know, guys, you're going to have these lustful thoughts. So women, you can't do anything to provoke them. So yeah, they are doing it. Just saying, like they're doing it, but they're doing it in a different way.
Here's the thing, right? Like, if I gave a shit, and I don't, like, if I gave a shit that my kid had hormones and was going to be having crushes on people and whatever, um, it's so hard to put myself in that position because I'm just like, that's what teenagers do. But if I did, I might say something like, well, you're not responsible for your first thought, but you're responsible for your second thought. Right? Like, so if your first thought is kind of not something you're proud of, then think, make a choice to
Do
think
you,
about
do
something
you
else.
yeah, do you act on that first thought? Then that's the problem.
Right. But what they're saying is you cannot have lust in your heart, even though that whore is showing cleavage. And it's like, oh, what whore? What boobs? Like, it's
You lost the
so
thread.
weird. And don't think about pink elephants, right? Like, it's that kind of thing, but it gets really twisted because everything is sexual to people who are obsessed with purity.
Yeah.
Everything is sexual. Everything is a temptation. I have this like core memory of being 13 or 14 years old, and there's I want to say it was Jodeci. The
Oh,
Jodeci song called "If I Can See You Again," and it was so like for R&B, like so mild, right?
yeah, that was
R&B in
mild. That was
the
a
90s,
mild song.
yeah, like R&B in the 90s was. I mean, maybe you can make an argument for being concerned, but that song wasn't it. And my uncle was trying to convince me that it had secret hidden messages about sex, and that if you listen carefully, it's not "if I could see you again," it's FUCK. So he's listening to this song that has nothing to do with sex, and he's hearing fuck over and over and over in his brain. One of us is in more danger here, and it isn't me. It's that kind of thinking is just like, if you look for evil and like depravity everywhere, you will find it.
Mhm.
But these people don't realize that that's what they're doing. They think,
I think they're protecting things. So yeah.
yeah, like Satan put fuck in that song, and I am doing a good thing by trying to get you not to listen to it. And it's like Satan didn't have anything to do with this, and that word isn't in that song. Like, it's a mild example because I don't want to get into it with the shit that the
Yeah.
Duggars and I get into because it's too gross. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Speaking of gross, Josh Duggar.
gosh, Duggar.
So you kind of touched on earlier about what he was arrested for. I want to touch on this a bit in a different capacity, in that
Okay.
they went to his used car dealership where they said that they had tracked child pornography on a computer, and there was some sort of software he had on the computer that was
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
it
This
was
was quite the cameo. Ah,
yeah. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it, and I don't.
Covenant Eyes is what it is called.
Yeah, Covenant Eyes was on this computer. So Covenant Eyes is a thing to deny you to watch porn. That is actually what the whole software is designed for. However, Josh Duggar, who is supposedly technically savvy as an IT person, partitioned his hard drive in two different hard drives. So the Covenant Eyes was working on the one, which made it look fine. You just switch between the two partitions.
You catch what Covenant Eyes actually does, though, because this is something that they just sort of pranced on by. Covenant Eyes doesn't stop you from looking at porn.
And monitors it.
Covenant Eyes take screen caps. They didn't go into this much detail on the documentary, but the important part I'll get to. It takes screen caps of your activity, and or I don't have it, so I don't know like exactly. It might do it every so often, or it might do it just when you hit certain flagged sites. And what it does is it sends that screen cap to an accountability person.
Oh yeah.
Why did Josh Duggar have an accountability person if no one knew he was watching child porn?
That's because Josh Duggar in 2003 molested
That
his
problem was solved,
sisters.
Doug. Everybody said that problem was solved. It never happened again. I want to know. I got so mad when they said that because they said in the documentary it sends it to an accountability person, but I already knew that. Who was getting those screen caps? Who
Mhm.
was it that was
You know
assigned
it's Jim Bob.
on a
You
leash?
know it was Jim Bob. You know that.
Probably. This is my problem here is you don't get to say that the problem is solved and that he's never going to do it again and everything is fine and then have this software on somebody's computer because that says the problem isn't solved.
Right. And the thing is, this is what led to all the demise of the Duggars, like not having a show. Like this is
Mhm.
it. Like, and the thing is, this happened before they even had a show. Like
The
the
molesting his sisters did.
the original complaint was back in 2003, and the idea that like a few things here,
There's so many.
because I have some things to say, so let me roll here for a minute. Um, it was interesting that they talked to Bobby and Jim Holt, which was the Jim Bob Duggars and Michelle Duggars like best friends, who were also former best friends. But when this happened, Josh was in courtship with their daughter. And when they found out about it, they were like, well, what the hell? Why didn't you tell us that? And they were like, and Jim Bob was like, well, we figured that Josh would tell your daughter when they got married. And Jim was like, well, do you mean that you were expecting like my daughter to be like a carrot to lead him back to being straight? And then Jim Bob was like, yeah. Like, holy fucking shit. If I was a parent, I would be furious. I'd be furious.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he actually used the words "you were using my daughter as a carrot."
Yes, that was what he said.
To believe for a moment Jim Bob Duggar is still alive after that conversation.
That Jim Holt has a lot more ability to restrain himself than I do.
Oh yes.
So there's that bit. And then it turns out that Jim Holt and Jim Bob take Josh to the police station to make a statement. Like Jim's like, you got to have him be accountable for this. This is not a little thing. And Jim Bob's like, absolutely. So they take him to see this cop, and the cop's like, listen to it and goes, I'm going to let you off this time. But if you do this again, I'm going to come down really hard on you. And then that was at the end of episode 2. In episode 3, we find out the cop that did that was sentenced to 56 years in prison for having child pornography material. Like, oh my God.
So,
like,
so Jim and Bobby were so zen, given what they were talking about, right? Like, it's. I just can't imagine, right? Like, we can't talk about it without getting worked up, and it didn't happen to us.
yeah.
So, given that, it's hard to get a read on everything. But
Yeah.
I feel like the implication was when Jim Bob said, "Oh, I'm going to take him to the cops," and Jim said, "I'm going," was because he didn't think Jim Bob would go to the cops.
Yeah. I think it was an accountability thing for sure. I think he was like, I'm going with to make sure this happens.
Yeah.
And we should also note that Jim Holt's wife, Bobby, testified against Josh in court. And Jill Duggar was prepared to do it, and they decided not to call her.
I actually want to say that is like one of the small mercies given to Jill Duggar, right? Because she said
Agreed.
apparently they got what they needed from someone else. And I think without the Holt's testimony, they would have needed her. They would have needed somebody to show that it was a pattern. Because she is so there's so much about it that breaks my heart about her situation. They ask and the producers ask about what actually happened because we don't know. There might be a news article out there somewhere, but like I don't know. It doesn't say in the documentary. We know it's worse than what Jim Bob initially said it was. We don't know what it was. So it's worse than touching them inappropriately while they were asleep.
Over clothes.
But there's so many things that are worse than that.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, I lost my train of thought because I got stuck on that. Oh, because she said her husband said she got worked up, and he said something about they didn't want to talk about it, and they
Yep.
shared. They talked about like under the I don't remember the wording, but it's like there's it comes up a few times with a few different people, but and in that conversation about Josh possibly marrying the Jim's daughter, that there's some kind of belief they have that there's like a like the room in that last quote we talked about, where if you're a married couple, you have like a little vault, and I can tell you if you were my husband any and all manner of things, and when we leave that room, it never gets spoken of again.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that's what they did about what happened to her with her brother. Unfortunately, two things here. One, I think that that happened because she had to confess to her husband what her sexual impurities were.
Oh, I'm sure that was part of it.
Yeah, and that enrages me, but I feel like that is 100% like that has to be part of it. But two, that I understand, okay, saying I don't want to talk about this in detail in a documentary. I
Yeah,
get
for
that,
sure.
like 100%, and I don't expect anybody to pour out their trauma for the world to eat, like fine. But what she kept saying was, this is stuff that should have never come out. And that really bothered me because a person who is not raised in an environment like that feels relief when these things come out and they are validated and they
She
are
felt she
treated.
felt shame and guilt. Yeah.
Yeah, and she doesn't have that freedom. That these things coming out didn't give her freedom and validation. They made her feel more trapped. And that is such a commentary on the way that these people are raising their children.
Yeah.
And I don't blame her for that at all. Like she's a grown woman who has really only been out of the machine for a very short period of time. And she's doing that with her husband who was in the machine as well. At some point, maybe they will work all the way through it. But maybe
Maybe
they
they
won't.
won't. Maybe they
Yeah.
won't. There's still a lot to go through, and we only have like
10
12 minutes
minutes.
left. Yeah, 10,
Well,
12
okay.
minutes.
So
So
let's hit
go
two.
ahead. You go first.
I want to talk about Anna Duggar and I want to talk about the Joshua generation.
Yes, those are the two things I wanted to hit on too.
Okay,
So we're
good.
we're aligned. You go first with Anna Duggar because you had a
Okay.
real point about this.
I feel really fucked up.
And Anna Duggar, just for clarification, is Josh Duggar's wife.
Josh Duggar's wife, yeah. So obviously she married him, probably not knowing he was into child porn, I would assume. And this all
Oh,
happened.
I doubt she knew about any of the accusation shit.
Well, that's right, because they don't watch TV. So yeah, she probably know anything.
Mhm.
Divorce doesn't exist in this world. Your husband is your authority in this world. And as they pointed out in the documentary, she has no education.
Mhm.
She has no one outside the organization that even speaks to her. And, hopefully, I guess, maybe because they don't get outside information, she is not aware of the horrible things people are saying about her. I get it because my knee-jerk reaction to somebody saying I'm standing by my husband, I'm not getting a divorce, blah blah blah, he's the father of my children. In that situation, my knee-jerk reaction is you're an evil bitch. uh, but like how old was she when he got arrested? She's like 22, 23,
Well, they already had like 3 or 4 kids.
but they were still in their early 20s. Like that's
Yeah,
what
they
I'm
were in their early
saying
20s.
is like you've got a mess of kids, no education, no money of your own, and you are told that this person is the authority in your life, and when he isn't, your dad is. Well, I would bet $1,000,000 if I had it that her dad is saying you have to stay married.
Oh, I'm
Where does
sure.
she go? And they point out that there are people that would help
Resources.
her or organizations that would help her, but she doesn't necessarily know about it. But here's the thing, okay? He's in prison. Absolutely none of those resources would put her in a better place with her kids than she is now.
Fair point.
Abuse happens, unfortunately, in shelters. Poverty is a real fucking thing when you have a whole bunch of kids and no way to get a good job.
Yep.
I mean, I think she is brainwashed. I think that she is a victim of her upbringing and a victim of her husband.
Mm-hmm.
I hope with like everything in me that maybe, she'll reach out to Jill one day and Jill will be like, you can leave, right? Or whatever. But I get it. As much as I hate it with every fiber of my being, I kind of also hate people talking about her like she's evil. I don't think she has any fucking idea what is good or bad. I don't think that women in these organizations are allowed to develop that. Bless you.
Sorry.
That's okay, but that's my point. Like, I just don't think that is a thing that is available to her at this point in her life. And I think it's counterproductive to make her an accomplice or a villain. She is an extremely young woman who has a whole bunch of kids and no idea what it looks like to even think about leaving your husband.
Yeah. And her husband, when he gets out, has to have supervised visits for their kids. So it's not like he can just slide right back into the house, What a mess. And I feel bad for her, but at the same, there is part of me is like, just leave. But like, I'm also not her. I wasn't raised in this brainwashing of you can't leave. This is the person God chose for
She
you
was
kind of shit.
also raised in an environment that said that it is normal for men to find babies sexual.
Yep.
And so,
And to do shit to their sisters and
yeah,
kids.
but literally, like, in the paperwork, in the manuals, it says you have to protect your sons from seeing naked babies because nudity, even on a baby, is sexual. She was brought up that way too. She was taught from those same books. To her, it's like, well, somebody along the way didn't protect him from it. Not, this is fucking horrific. It's not okay. It's not normal. Nobody thinks this way. That is not a viewpoint that has been allowed into her life.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking and horrible. And I do believe that we are all culpable for the decisions that we make, even when we're in a high control group, but culpability looks different depending on what's available to you.
Yeah, that's true. It's just a tough one because she has little kids and they're not as quite as little, but she's still, I don't know what she's doing. Like nobody.
I think
That
she's
was
getting money from Jim Bob and Michelle, probably.
I'm sure. So yeah, so there's that bit. The other thing we do need to talk about is Joshua generation, which was something which wasn't talked upon in that documentary that much, but at the same time, it's kind of terrifying.
It's like when you
So
have the horror movie and you think it's over, and then they show you like that last cutscene, and you're like, oh no, there's going to be a sequel.
yeah, and this is going to be a sequel, folks. So yeah, so Joshua generation. I'll just give a brief description of it. They talked to one kid. I think his name is Alex Harris, who was who was an intern for Justice John Kennedy before he retired from the Supreme Court. And so the Joshua generation is this belief of a bunch of homeschooled IBLP kids who get grown up and thrown into positions of power and to accumulate as much power as possible, as fast as possible, to make this country a Christian nation in the form of what IBLP deems a Christian nation. So the most prominent member of this generation was Madison Cawthorn, who turned out to be just a giant shithead. And it's an interesting thing. So basically, it's like these homeschooled kids who brought up in the IBLP way of thinking and thinking how a patriarchy and women should be at home and all this stuff. And they believe that is the only way to live. There is no other way to live. That is the right way to live. And we need to get into as many places as we possibly can. And they said the brass ring was the Supreme Court. And I believe they have somebody in there, at least one who is, and I think it's Amy Coney Barrett. I think she's part of that crowd. She has like 9 fucking kids. Several of them are adopted, but she's very much in that sort of Handmaid's Tale kind of thinking.
God, it was so upsetting when that woman said when she read The Handmaid's Tale, she was like, "Oh my God, this is how I was raised."
Yes, that was mortifying. Yes.
Yeah. So obviously, I think it's not obvious because like normal people don't think this way. But once you're told about it, it's like, oh, that is the obvious end goal of the quiverful movement.
For sure.
Like, it's just a straight line. You wouldn't care about having more Christian babies than non-Christian babies if you didn't also care about power.
Power is the whole thing. I mean, it's power from the top down. It's Bill Gothard, and then it's the fathers, and then like it's a power centric thought process, a
Yeah.
belief system that is all about power and authority, and you must obey. And that's the thing that they can't abide is the idea that there are people that can think for themselves, think outside of the religion, think about things
Well,
that don't coincide with what they believe.
just imagine if like a Duggar girl at 15 years old like met me. Like, like the way that would blow their mind. So wouldn't it just be better if people like me didn't exist or get to live the way we want to? Like,
Yeah, because you're wrong. You're not what they want.
I think
And me too. Me too, by the way.
well, yeah, but I think this comes back again to the culpability of TLC and Discovery.
Mm.
Because they normalized this. They knew that it was driving people towards IBLP, and they knew that for the people who weren't driven toward it, it was normalizing it for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, the most triggering part of this for me was that they're so nice, they're so well behaved, they're so sweet. Well, somebody even said, I wish my mom was like Michelle Duggar.
No, you don't.
That is really dangerous to do that, because then people are not always able to handle the criticism. This
Right.
parasocial relationship that they have developed, they only see the good parts, and you say, no, the organization they're part of is evil. And it's like, they're not evil. Look at how happy they are. Well, maybe less so now that Josh Duggar got thrown in prison, but
12 and a half years.
That was going to happen.
Yeah, he got 12 and a half years, so good for him.
I think he deserves longer. I mean,
for sure.
I feel like a lot of people get longer for less, but that's
just what we think.
I mean, I happen to know at least one person who got longer for less, but that's not for the live stream. But.
Yeah. Okay, so let's put a bow on this. There's still a shit ton we could talk about, but
if you 17 episodes on this.
It's funny. I think we say that a lot about a lot of things, but this one was seriously one we could have stretched into 2 hours, and we did with NXIVM, but that was 2 seasons. This was 4 episodes, and I could have easily seen this be 2 episodes.
I could have seen it be 3, like for real, like because we could do a whole episode on the pearls. We do a whole episode just on the Duggars and a whole episode just on IBLP. Like, it's very intense. I do want to be sure again, though, to thank Angel Albring for sharing her perspectives from her experience. She's very open about it, and so she was happy to do it. But as you can imagine, not everybody is in a place to be very open about these things, and some people would much rather forget it. So I want to thank her again, and it's too bad she couldn't join us, but her input was invaluable, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Angel, for your insight and help. We really appreciate that. Yeah. So why don't we talk a bit about the idea that next month we are off. We're taking a month away.
Yeah.
So August, we're away. So we're not going to be around next month.
We're going on late summer vacation.
Yes, as people do. So, but we are coming back in September. What we were going to talk about is this, Kumare. This is a fascinating one because it's a fake cult.
No, you've seen it, right, Doug?
I have.
I have not. I've heard a lot about it, though.
So basically, this is about a person who sees how many followers he can acquire without actually being what he says he is, and then at the end, he confesses that he's not who he is.
But I guess in the meantime.
But it's a lot. It's a fascinating case study in how people will attach themselves to folks that they think are charismatic and have a good thing to say. And this is 12 years old, by the way.
Is it really that old?
Oh my God. I saw that and I was like, what? Like, I was a little floored by that, but I'm old, so whatever.
But as I recall the way it was initially pitched to me is that basically it's almost like a slightly more serious Sacha Baron Cohen type experiment going
Very
in.
much so. Very much so. But like I said, and you will see watching this, just the way he feels about everything is very genuine. So yeah. So
I'm
we're gonna tackle this because this isn't like a cult where people technically get hurt, but
there are
kind of they
consequences.
do. They kind of
Yeah,
their feelings that get hurt. So
there are
yeah, that
consequences to it, but yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the cult elements work in a situation where there is no ill intent.
yes. So it's going to be fascinating, just a sort of case study of where nobody dies, nobody gets abused. So, and we need some of those as a palate cleanser once in a
Oh yeah,
while.
for sure.
But we have some big ones coming up that we haven't really solidified, so we're not going to go there yet. But yeah, I just want to say thanks a lot for being here, Renee. You bring a lot of
Angry.
information to this one, because like this is a little bit more in your wheelhouse than mine. So
Well, I love doing this show, and this was a particularly tough one, but I think we still managed to have enough of a meaningful conversation to make it fun and not horrible.
it was horrible, but not too
The
horrible. So
documentary was horrible. This experience talking about it wasn't horrible.
yeah. All right, folks. So thanks for watching, and we will see you on September 6th. So take care, folks.